We're going live now. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and for those who don't know, we're all about bringing science, adventure, and conservation into classrooms across North America and hopefully beyond. I'm very excited to introduce today's speaker. Páll Davíðsson is joining us from Iceland today. He is the founder of an organization called Vox Naturae. And it's dedicated to raising global awareness of ice and what's happening with ice around the world. So through art, through science, creating eye-opening events to celebrate glaciers and communicate the message that they are changing right now and what that means to us in the future as a species. And Páll also works for the United Nations, and he's been home in Iceland for the last 7 weeks, and very graciously offered his time to join us here today. So Páll, it's so great to have you joining us.
I'm very happy to be with you. And thank you for your interest in knowing more about my world, the world of ice.
All right. Well, I think it's very important because even though glaciers may be far removed from where we live, I think you're going to share with us today that they do have a big impact on our futures, on everybody's futures.
Very much so, huh? So that's something I'm very much looking forward to discussing with you all, because this will be affecting your future and the future of all the kids attending the class.
Absolutely.
Do you hear me properly?
Sorry, I missed that last part, Páll.
Do you hear me properly?
Yeah, nice and loud and clear. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So you connected with my class a couple years ago. Now, it was about 1.5 years ago, and you shared a little bit about Iceland. So maybe before you, because I know you have a little presentation, can you tell us a little bit about what Iceland's like? It gets the name the land of fire and ice. Can you talk a little bit about that before maybe you share a little bit about glaciers and sea ice?
Beautiful. I mean, actually, the kids, do you know where Iceland is?
Let me turn on a microphone here for you. So, Mr. Koshin's class, your mic's on. Do you guys know where Iceland is?
Yes. Yeah. Off the coast of Greenland. It's around Greenland.
Very good. Exactly. On the east of Greenland. Huh? It is the westernmost country of Europe. So we're the European country closest to the United States. And it has the strange name of Iceland, right? And it's actually quite an interesting story because you've heard about the Vikings, the people in the big ships. They believed in people like Thor and Odin. And these people, some 1,000 years ago, they ventured into the ocean. They traveled from Europe over to America. And on that way, they found this country. Actually, they found 2 countries. One being Greenland, which is covered by ice, and the other, Iceland, which was actually quite green at the time. So what happened was that the people who came at a time when it was surrounded by sea ice, huge blocks of ice, bigger than a house, surrounding Iceland. So they said, let's go further west on the way to America, and they found another country, but they discovered this country actually has more ice than Iceland. So what are we going to do? Are we going to call this more Iceland? No. What they said was that we have to give this country a name that will actually be appealing to people, because nobody's going to want to live in a place where there is only ice. So they called Greenland, the land of the green, which is not green at all, it's very icy. And the interesting thing about Iceland is that Iceland is, have you learned about the continental drift? Have you learned about the continental plateau, like the American plateau and the European plateau, right? Yeah?
Let me check with Mrs. Carl's class. Have you guys learned a little bit about continental drift at all?
Yeah, we have.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, one interesting thing about Iceland is that Iceland is situated in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Let me actually show you Let me actually show you a quick, let me just try to figure out here, Google Handout, and screen share. Oops. Entire screen. Okay, are you seeing my map here?
Try one more time. It started off, did you pick the first option to share the whole screen? Oh, there we go. It's going now.
I did, but let me do it again. I think it's going to be more.
Now.
Do you see it now? Okay, let me try one more time.
Try one more time, Páll. Select the first option.
Entire screen. It says that I'm screen sharing. Does it work now?
It's working now, yep.
No. You see a map of the world? You see a map of Iceland?
Yep.
You do?
Absolutely,
Beautiful.
yep.
Okay. So you see that Iceland is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the funny thing is that Iceland is in fact the bottom of the ocean, but on the surface. So maybe you see my cursor. The point is that here, between the two continents of America and Europe, you have a ridge where those two continental plates meet, and exactly where Iceland is, it has risen. And so this is actually the bottom of the ocean. It's a very, very new territory. And because this is where the continental plates meet, it's basically like all of Europe meeting America and hitting each other. It's a very, very volcanic area. So we in Iceland, we have many volcanoes. All our houses are in fact heated with geothermal heating. That is hot water coming from the earth. We're not burning any coals, we're not burning any oil. We have just hot water coming from the earth, heating our houses. And we have huge glaciers. Maybe you see a picture of them here, if we screen. No, you don't. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, if you change the ears here. Okay, so that's a little bit about Iceland. So before I start, do you have any questions about Iceland? Here you can see the glaciers now. Do you see this now?
Yep, we can see the white on the right corner.
Yes, exactly. So I want to check with you kids before I move to talk about snow and ice. Do you have any questions about Iceland?
Let me visit each class, and we'll see if each class has maybe one question about Iceland, and then we can switch over to talking about the glaciers.
Beautiful.
Mr. Koshin's group, your microphone is on if you want to ask a question about Iceland.
I think we'll just wait till the end if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Mrs. Thornhill's group, your microphone's on if you want to ask a question about Iceland.
Okay, Remy. Ask your question, Remy. Okay, Remy, stay there in front of you. Ask your question.
Is it hot in Iceland?
Say again. Is it hot in Iceland?
Yep, that was her question.
Yes. You know what? It's really funny. Iceland can be warmer than New York. And Iceland is in fact not extremely cold. Canada and Russia, for instance, are much colder than Iceland. And the reason why Iceland is not so very cold is because we have something called temperate climate. So if you're still looking at the map, we have warm ocean from the Bay of Mexico going up north, and it warms up Iceland. So you're very welcome to come, and you will not freeze to death. But you would also not complain about the heat. It is not very warm here either.
All right, good question. So Mrs. Barry's grade 3s, your microphone is on if you have a question about Iceland.
Right here? It's already over. Avery. What's the biggest glacier in Iceland?
Oh, that's a very good question. Huh? The biggest glacier in Iceland is called Vatnajökull, which basically means the glacier of water. And this is actually a very good question because glaciers are just frozen water. And in fact, glaciers are the biggest reservoirs of water in the world. Actually, if you think about it, sorry, am I losing you there? Think about it. If you think of no. Am I losing you there?
Hey,
Hello?
Páll, can you still hear me? Páll, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, sorry, we're just having a little bit of, the internet's just not really cooperating. We just had kind of the sound duck out a little bit, but I can hear you clearly now again. Okay, are we ready for the next question? Páll, can you still hear me? Okay, sorry, boys and girls. I think we're just having a little bit of a connection issue. Let me just see. Let me see if everybody else can still hear me. Mrs. Carl's class, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready for the next question.
Oh, okay, perfect. Mrs. Carl's class, go ahead if you have a question about Iceland.
What was the question? I dropped out completely.
What fraction does the glacier take up of Iceland?
It takes up almost 30% of Iceland.
Wow.
Yeah. And do you also know what? If all the glaciers melt and you would take the water in the glaciers and put it on top of Iceland, Iceland would be under 30 meters of water. Joe, can you help me calculate that into feet? What is that?
It would be about 90 feet.
Like 90 feet of water.
Yeah.
Right? So if you took all the waters in the glaciers, you melted it, and you put it over Iceland like a layer of water, Iceland would be under 90 feet of water. There is so much water in the glaciers.
That's a lot of water.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been through each classroom. Páll, do you want to share a little bit now about the glaciers and sea ice?
Yes, with pleasure. Huh? So what I want to share with you and what I want you to think about is how our world looks from space, right? And if you, Joe, are you seeing the pictures, Earth systems on your screen?
Yeah, it loaded up just fine.
Okay. So if you look at the world from space, you will actually see, let's say maybe 4 colors, right? You will see the blue for the oceans. You will see the brown for the deserts. You will see the green for the forest and the pastures. And you will see white for ice and snow. And actually, for a big part of the year, almost like 30% of the Earth is covered by either ice and snow. And this is something I want to talk to you about because ice and snow usually is very far away. I know that part of your class is in Texas, so maybe you never get ice and snow. So you may wonder, why is this relevant to you? And what I want to try to explain to you is that everything in the world is connected. So if we take out the white on this map, and if we lose the world's glaciers, that will impact everyone. First, I think it's important to understand a little bit with snow. where do we have basically frozen water apart from your fridge and ice? Apart from your fridges, we have huge amount of ice and snow up in the north and in the extreme south. This is the Arctic and the Antarctic. These are the poles of the world, very far away. And probably you have seen movies like Ice Age, or you've seen movies about explorers. This is all happening in these extreme regions. You also have something called permafrost up in Alaska, up in the Soviet Union, right? Which is basically frozen earth that remains frozen between the years. And then you have something like in Iceland, which is called glaciers. That is huge amounts of ice and snow packed together, which have the ability to move because of its own weight, right? So basically, you always have it in the extreme regions. You have it on the poles, you have it in the Arctic region, you have it in the mountains, right? And what I want to share with you, because this is my world, I live in the Arctic, I live in a mountainous area in Iceland, and I want to share with you what is happening to our world, right? So first, to begin with, this is the Arctic. This is basically the northern part of the world, and it encompasses several countries, including Canada, Soviet Union, Norway, Sweden, not Soviet Union, Russia, and this part of the world is so vital. And here you can see how quickly this ice is disappearing, right? In 1979, right, you would have the extent of the ice that you're looking at now, right? This is basically where my younger brother was born. In 2012, it has retreated so much, right? Very much of it has disappeared. And what has actually happened is that in several years, since 1979, we have been losing 40%. It's almost like half of the ice in the Arctic. And these are very, very dramatic changes. And we think that even by 2050, so like when you will be, what, 40 years old? Only young people like me and Joe perhaps, there will be no ice in the Arctic. Now, why do you care about that? Now, one thing to understand is that ice is in fact the habitat for many of the world's most majestic creatures. So here is a picture of ice, right, by the ocean, and you see no life, right? There are no penguins, there are no animals, there are no seals you see. But if you went to the ridge of this, and if you looked into the ocean, you would see magnificent mammals. You would be seeing whales, you would be seeing seals, you would, if you go further inland, you would be seeing polar bears. And the thing is that all these animals depend on the ice for their livelihoods. The sea ice is the ground on which the polar bears travel. And when there is sea ice, they can travel far and hunt. And if you take this land away, they will die. Sea ice also, there's something about the mixture of the fresh water in the sea ice and the salty ocean water that creates very, very fertile breeding grounds for very small are at the basis of the food chain in the Arctic. And this is the food for the big whales. So if you take away this ice, the whales will have nothing to eat, and then of course the whales will very much disappear. So this is one reason why it's so important. It is also important because I'm going to just use this picture here. And what is also very important, because ice works as the sunglass of the world, right? Ice is the most reflective surface of the world, which basically means that all the solar rays that come in, if they hit ice, they go back into the ocean. So the ice protected the Earth against the solar rays. But if you take the ice away, and instead you have blue oceans, the rays that will go into the oceans and they will warm the oceans. And much warmer, which will make it more difficult to live here. So this ice in the north, even though it's very far away, is absolutely crucial to our planet as we know it. Now, there is also ice in the ground. You will see it on this picture with the purple colors, right? And this ice in the ground, is called permafrost. So it basically makes the earth there very, very hard. So all the countries living there, from Canada to Alaska to Russia to Norway and Greenland, they have built infrastructure. But now what is happening, because the planet is warming, is that the hard ground, it's becoming soft. Imagine that you build something on an ice cube and the ice cube is melting. But that is exactly what is happening. And as a result, infrastructure like roads and houses and railroads are crumbling, right? And it's breaking down. And what is also happening is that this permafrost stores vast amount of something called greenhouse gas. And greenhouse gas, including methane, carbon dioxide, warms the planet. And this permafrost stores greenhouse gas for millions of years. And now when it's warming, it's being released, right? So it's almost like you keep something in the fridge and it stays nice and cool, but when you take it out, it starts to get warm and it starts to smell. It starts to release all kinds of smell. Well, what the ground is now releasing is greenhouse gas. You can actually burn, as you can see on this picture, and this will make our planet even warmer. Right? Category I want to tell you about is snow and ice cover. And probably many of you will have seen snow. Fewer of you will have seen majestic glaciers, right? Huge amount of ice up in the mountains. And here is just one example to show you how quickly we're losing this beautiful part of the Earth. This is Rhone Glacier in Europe, in the Alps, and this beautiful car from 1850, showing how the glacier almost goes up to this hotel. And here's another picture a few years later, right? This is a more recent picture from 1981, where you see that it has gone up, and you will see the white beneath the glacier. It will show you where the glacier was. And here in 2007, you will see that it's almost disappeared, right? So this is another picture of this kind of hotel, just from a different angle. Right? And you see this huge gap. It's almost like a dried river. This is where the glacier was. And this hotel, only a few years ago, had a beautiful view over the glacier, which has now disappeared. Here in Alaska, you will see how the glacier has retreated and has declined by 300 meters in only a few years. That's like, what, 9,000 feet, probably, or 900 feet, yeah? Up in the Himalayan region, the glaciers are also retreating. On the top, you have an image high up in the Himalaya mountains from 1921. And on the lower picture, you have a picture from the same area from 2009, right? And you will see how extremely much the ice has declined. This is now much more brown area. And if you look at the red arrow, this is where the ice was in 1921. And now, 90 years later, it has decreased to this line by like 100 meters. So if you go out and you walk from one place and you walk 100 meters, 300 feet, you will know how much this ice has thinned in the Himalayan region. This is huge amount of water. And why do we care about that? Why do we care about the glaciers in the Himalayas? Yes, they are beautiful, but do they have more of a role? Yes, they definitely do. This is a map of the Himalayan region, where you have very important countries like India. Maybe some of you are from there. Pakistan, China, Nepal, Bhutan, just to name a few. And all these blue lines, they represent rivers that come from the Himalayan region. And all these rivers have their origin in glaciers. So if you take the glaciers away, you remove the source of the water. And that will affect the water streaming down to more than 1 billion people living downstream. Somebody of you asked me what is the biggest glacier in Iceland and how much area do they cover in Iceland, right? And what I want you to think about is how much water is actually stored in the glaciers, right? So if you think about all the waters you have seen, all the rivers you have seen in the world, all the pictures of beautiful lakes that you would have seen, this water is only 0.4%. It is less than 1/100th of all the fresh water in the world. 70% of the world's fresh water is stored in glaciers and ice. 70%. And now, as the pictures have shown you, this is disappearing at a very rapid rate. So I'm just going to drop over this. Now, what is actually happening is a transformation. We're looking at a transformation that because of warming, ice is going from land, like you can see here, and like you can see here, ice is going from land and is melting and is going into the seas. And because all this water is now going from the land into the seas they rise because you put more water into it. And what is projected is that sea level rise may go up by 1 meter, 3 feet, by within the next 80 years, like within 2100, right? And that will mean that many, many important areas, you will see the red lines here, will go underwater, right? And actually, for you to realize the huge amount of water stored in ice, you will know, I will tell you now that if all the ice in the world melted and all the water from the ice was put into the seas, sea levels would go to where the green line is now. It basically means that New York would be underwater, Philadelphia would be underwater, Baltimore would be underwater, your capital would be underwater, right? And there is no technology that can stop this. This is just too much water to cope with. And this, of course, means that hundreds of millions of people will have to flee their homes and move inland, and that will cause extreme difficulties. And here's an example of cities that have been affected by sea level rise. And so what we are basically trying to emphasize is that the big ice is so important in so many respects. And I just want to recap that. I mean, we have the beautiful whales and the polar life that is entirely dependent on ice. And you will see that picture there. You have cultures like the Inuit culture, or even culture like skiing and mountaineering, which are dependent on ice. And this will all be affected. And you have energy production that depends on the water, and food production that depends on the water coming from glaciers that will be affected. It will affect our cultures. Imagine living in a world without ice, and how a much more poor world that would be. Leonardo DiCaprio, in his acceptance speech for the Oscar, he said how very sad it was that for his film, The Revenant, you will probably not have seen, but for the film he got the Oscar for, they had to travel very far just to find snow. And yeah, so I hope that you heard some of this, and let me just stay here, stop here for the time being, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Joe, did you hear any of that? Did that come across?
That came out perfectly. There was maybe one or two little kind of staticky parts, but it came through really well. And Páll, I have to thank you because you did a really good job of sharing just how important our ice is, whether it's sea ice, whether it's permafrost, whether it's ice in glaciers. You know, we have classes joining from Texas, classes here in Ontario where our winter's just coming to an end, and we don't really think of snow and ice as that important. And you did a really good job kind of making that point hit home, just how it can affect the whole world, the loss of that ice. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, let's visit some of our classrooms and see if they have any questions about glaciers, about ice, and just what's happening when we do lose that ice. So Mr. Koshin's class, they're a grade 6-7 class in Kakabeka Falls. I'm going to turn your microphone on. If you have a couple of questions for Páll, now's your chance.
How long have you been doing this?
Oh, interesting. I have been working on this for 5 years, and it's actually strange that I'm working on this because my work is very much based in Africa. So in a few weeks I'll be going to Africa, but the reason I work on this is because in Africa I see that so many conflicts, people fighting, is because of resources, in particular access to water. So when people don't have water, you have wars. And so when I started thinking about what is happening in the world, I became very scared because I saw that the water banks that we have, the water reservoirs we have in the glaciers, they are disappearing. And I asked myself, how is that going to affect our world?
All right, go ahead if you have another question.
Do you think that one day all the glaciers will like melt?
Iceland, it is said that Iceland will be without glaciers in like 200 years. But other areas closer to home, like Glacier National Park, Glacier National Park will be without glaciers in something like 50 years. So when you're a grown person, there may be no glaciers over there. And over the past decades, something like 600 glaciers have disappeared all over the world. But, and that's the important thing, we can do something about this, right? The reason we're losing the glaciers is because of how we treat our planet, right? We are putting into the planet all kinds of gases called greenhouse gases that make the planet warmer. And warmth is not good for ice. Warmth is not even actually too good for us human beings. So if we stop doing that and start to behave more responsibly towards the planet, things will change.
All right, great question. We have one more maybe, and then we'll go to another class.
Okay. Is there a way to save / recreate the reflective power of glaciers?
That's a very interesting question. There are measures, and they are called, for instance, geoengineering. There are measures like putting spray in the air to reflect more sun into space. But the problem with this is that we, as species, human beings, we have never done this before. So if we start spraying all kinds of things or putting up mirrors all around the world, which is of course going to be very, very expensive, we don't know how that will affect other parts of the world. But what we know is that snow and ice have been doing this for us free of charge for all of human history, and it's worked beautifully. So this we say, let's try to retain the system which we have.
All right, very cool question. In Weatherford, Texas, we have Mrs. Thornhill's class. They're a grade 3 class. I think you might have 2 classes joining you there today.
Yes.
Yes. Joseph, you want to ask a question? Just stand where you are. I think they can see you.
Yeah. Stand. Just turn towards the camera side. There you go.
Do you have a warning alert
For what?
for the glaciers?
Do we have for what? Actually, let me say something. I like this very much because we actually, here in Iceland, we say that ice is nature's warning alert to humanity, right? So basically, through ice, the planet is telling us something very, very big is changing, right? Let me explain a little bit more. We, as humans, we don't feel the change that is happening on our planet, right? Because this is a change that is happening over decades. And maybe a few degrees Fahrenheit from one day to another, you just think is normal, right? So we don't understand, we don't grasp what is happening. But here in Iceland, and in the Himalayan region, and in the Andes region, and the Arctic region, we see this happening because we see the glaciers disappearing, right? So it is uncontestable that something very, very big is changing and that our planet is warming. And it is through this change, ice melting, that the planet is telling us, ooh, something big is happening and you need to act. And I actually want to use the opportunity to tell you, we, as an organization, we are using this, organizing already this year a concert and all kinds of events on glaciers to share with the world that we're losing something which is very important and beautiful.
Okay, you'll have to, maybe after today, you can share a little more information with me and I can pass it on to the classroom.
With pleasure.
Okay, Mrs. Thornhill's class, do you have one more question?
What is the biggest glacier you've seen in the Arctic?
What is the? Actually, the biggest glacier I've seen in the Arctic is Vatnajökull Glacier, one in Iceland. Right? In the Arctic, the biggest glaciers in the Arctic are in Greenland. Right? They cover the whole country, but I've never seen them. But I've seen the glaciers here in Iceland. And but what is very sad is that when I speak to the people who live in Greenland, they say that the big glacier is sick and they are asking for help.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. It's, you know, our planet is getting sick. The glaciers are sick, and you're right. They are showing us that they need help right now. Mrs. Barry, so another group. I think there's 2 classrooms joining her in Weatherford, Texas.
How can we help in Texas?
Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Well, one thing is that when we do the festival, so later this year, we're bringing together top musicians, we're bringing together artists here in Iceland, and they're going to share with the world via Facebook and other medium what is happening, right? And I would love you kids to participate in that and share that message, because we have to tell the world that we have to act to save these beautiful constructs of nature. And also speak to your friends, speak to your parents, tell them about this, and when people are aware, things start to change.
All right, good question.
How cold can an iceberg be?
It broke the connection.
He's asking how cold can an ice or a glacier get?
Ah, how cold can it get? Interesting. Usually it doesn't go far below 0. Not very. So 0 is in Celsius. You guys may need to help me translate that. Right? It goes below freezing mark, and after that, that is the interesting thing. It starts to isolate. So let me tell you one thing with ice does, which is very, very important, right? You know that ice, it covers the lakes and the rivers, right? And when it does that, it actually protects the life under it, because it provides a protective sheet, right, from the harsh weather of the winter. So sometimes you will have all kinds of abundant fish life and all kinds of aquatic life prospering under the ice, because the ice is protecting it from the extreme cold of the weather. So ice itself happens when water freezes, and then it stays pretty much at that temperature.
Okay. Mrs. Carl's class is joining from just around the corner from me in Guelph, Ontario in Canada, and they're a grade 5-6 class. We'll give you the last couple of questions.
Thank you.
So where will we go if the world floods when the glaciers melt?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Can you repeat, please?
Where will we go if the flooding gets bad when the glaciers melt?
Wow. That is a huge question I have no answer to. This is actually very serious. I mean, let's say in some countries like the USA, because you're a very big country, you could move inland. Or because you're a rich country, you can try to raise barriers to protect, right? But it's very expensive, it's very difficult. In other places, like in the Mauritius or some of the Pacific islands, what is happening is that whole communities are losing their land, right? So countries that exist today may not exist several decades into the future because their land is underwater, right? So what's going to happen to those people? And this is why it's so important that we do something now, because it's not easy to move around. And I just want to add, we are today living in a world with population numbers the world has never seen before, right? By 2050, we'll perhaps be something like 9 billion people. We have never before have so many people lived on this planet. So we don't have much space, right? And I don't know if you see any of the news in Europe, but the problem we're facing in Europe is that there are wars in the Middle East and in Africa, and because of that, you have refugees coming over, right? But these are very small numbers to the refugees we will have in the world if the ocean starts to cover our land.
All right, go ahead with another question if you have one.
Nathan.
What the kids
Can we get that again? We didn't hear that.
What could kids do in general to help global warming?
What can kids do to help global warming?
Yes.
Yeah? This is such an important question, and thank you for that. Huh? And again, this is your world. Huh? Me and Joe and the rest, we're going to get away pretty cheap and easy, because before everything really starts to go bad, we will be out of here, right? And I think there are a number of things that you can do, right? You have organizations like ours, you have organizations like Global Citizen, World Wildlife Fund, who are really dedicated to those issues. And what I think is crucially important, and this is also a message to you, the teachers, is that you, as citizens of this world, you have to know what is happening to the world. You have to know what is happening to the world you will live in and you will inherit, right? So be curious, watch documentaries, go on websites, speak to your teachers, so that you're more connected and you understand what is at stake. And once you become more educated, you will start to see how you, as a person, can start to play a role.
Okay, and just while you mentioned documentaries, some of the classes may have had a chance to check out Chasing Ice already.
Yes.
That's a good one to show it. That really shows what's going on around with glaciers retreating.
It is a very good one, yes.
Yeah, so I believe that one's available on Netflix, or there's clips of it you can find on YouTube as well to watch. Well, Páll, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. We had a great group of classrooms from Canada and from the US joining today, well over 100 students, and I think, like you said, this is what's important, sharing this knowledge, and then now hopefully we have more who understand what's happening and who can share that knowledge with their parents, with their friends, with their families, because that's going to make a big difference, is sharing that knowledge so more know just what's happening.
Yeah, and it's very important to understand that we actually have the power to change. This may sound like such a big problem and we have no power to alter it, but we do. And just the fact that you have the ability to connect with the guy in Iceland to talk about what is happening to the world, it shows the power we have. And we can use the same power to create the world and protect the world that we want to live in.
All right, that's an excellent message. We're getting ready to sign off for today, but please do check out that documentary we mentioned if you haven't, Chasing Ice. You can check out a little bit more of Páll's work. I believe is it voxnatura.com?
Yeah, and we are actually changing our name to the Global Glacier Initiative, so there's a new website coming up. But I will be sharing with you information about our event, Celebrating Glaciers. I would love you kids to become involved.
Okay. You pass that on to me, and I'll make sure it gets to the right spot. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the microphones on. It's going to give the kids a chance to say goodbye and thank you, so it's going to get loud over there. And yeah, we'll let you continue with your day. I think you're 4 hours ahead of us, so it's probably getting close to maybe thinking about dinner or something.
Yes, indeed. But this has been very, very engaging and very encouraging. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you. Here come the microphones. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining in today. You guys enjoy the rest of your day, and we're signing off for now.